Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast, episode 26. Today, our guest is Jason Kessler. Kessler is a freelance journalist and activist who has written for VDare and the Daily Caller. He got his break in journalism exposing the racial double standards surrounding the Twitter messages of Charlottesville Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy, who was pushing to remove a historic Confederate monument after going on anti-white rants for a period of close to 10 years. But Kessler, a graduate of the University of Virginia, is best known as the organizer for the Unite the Right rally, which took place in August 2017. Perpetually pegged for the postmodern age as the deadly white supremacist rally, we'll find out why Kessler organized the event, what life has been like since then, and get his thoughts on the Charlottesville, DC comparison. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, good to be with you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to dive into it. I'm sure we'll go down a few rabbit holes, but you're a guy who is misunderstood, I think would be a correct characterization. So let's just start with a little bio. People who read my stuff, who follow me, probably think they have an idea of who you are, but we have you here. So let's find out. How would you categorize yourself politically, personally, kind of your worldview?
Yeah, so I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is a very liberal town. My family, it tends to be more conservative, Republican voting. I've myself been a centrist. I voted for both Democrats and Republicans. But I really didn't become politically active until I saw our country changing so much, and then really the previous political party distinctions didn't matter. I saw that our American history was being attacked. I saw that white people were being unfairly scapegoated, and I thought someone should stand up against that. And those have been the primary motivating factors for me politically since I've entered into public life.
So I don't know if you know, but I grew up in Richmond. Now I was born in 71, so I was hanging out in Charlottesville in like the early 90s. Now I was kind of a hippie back then, so maybe I just wasn't noticing these things. But to me, I would not have classified it as like the Berkeley of the Blue Ridge back then. People still called, people who went to UVA, all my friends that went there still called Thomas Jefferson Mr. Jefferson. There were all Black fraternities on campuses, but pretty much everybody was just kind of doing their thing. Maybe I was just happy hippie girl, doing whatever hippies do in the early 1990s. But, it seemed like it wasn't as crazy as it is now, obviously, but I wouldn't have even called it a liberal town back then. Do you see this? Do you think it's always been a liberal town, or is it just because there's a university there? Or has it happened like all progressivism? It seems to have happened almost overnight. Like we can look back now and see the progression, but I think it's happened so fast to some people that people I know that used to go to Charlottesville and, drink wine and go to their cute little restaurants, like don't even go there now. I mean, it's almost shocking to people.
Yeah, it's changed so fast, just like you were saying. And I'm sure a lot of other places are going through similar changes where they're just becoming radicalized by the far left. I mean, my experience there was always as a conservative community, but maybe that was just because, when I was very young, my family moved to New Mexico. And so we would come back and visit Virginia and Charlottesville and my grandparents over Christmases. So when you think of Christmas and when you think of, like, we would go to the UVA football games and go to church and all very like conservative stuff. So I wasn't aware of the greater political environment in Charlottesville, but my sense was that it was liberal, but it was the old school liberal, who respected free speech and felt like it was the mean Republicans that were preventing people from being able to exercise their free speech rights, who were just against the rich and the powerful and this kind of thing. When I moved into Charlottesville as an adult, is when I first started seeing like the radical, like proto-Antifa groups starting to form. Like there was a group called Showing Up for Racial Justice, and they were a group of like just motivated passionately with a cult-like intensity for on racial issues, like motivated by white guilt predominantly. And they would start a lot of the things that that we started seeing across the country, as far as like harassing people in restaurants and screaming over people so that they can't speak, and getting people kicked out of establishments or fired from their jobs. And that happened very quick.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to describe it. It was kind of like the old school liberals. I mean, that's, I guess, probably who I was running around with at the time as a hippie, you know, going to see Dave Matthews Band at Tracks for $1 or whatever. You know, everybody was just kind of doing their thing. You know, I guess you would, the leftists would call that my privilege or whatever. But yeah, I do think it's shocking to people. Even my hometown, Richmond, you know, it's always been a city, but it's always seemed like a really small town at the same time. And it definitely was conservative throughout all my upbringing. So yeah, that that chasm that we have bridged so quickly is shocking to people. So I want to get into some of why that has happened. We'll get into that too in a bit. But so I would kind of classify you as one of the first kind of renowned victims of cancel culture. I kind of hate that term, cancel culture, but everybody knows what it means. And I recently saw an interview with you where you said the establishment can bring the hammer down on any political dissent through a shock and awe campaign. But now anything is seemingly dissident, you know, whether you're a homeschooler, voting for Trump, going to church, not wanting to wear a mask. So I think many people today may start to sympathize with you that maybe didn't 2 days ago, 2 years ago. So I want to talk about that now. Our friend Carolina Contrarian writes, we're all Charlottesville now. Are you kind of seeing that? Like, kind of like, hey, I told you so, you know, we need to stop throwing each other under the bus, because any amount of disavowing and distancing is not going to help, because we're all going to be pegged as Nazis or neo-Confederates. Like, what are just your feelings about that?
Yeah, it's wild, because it seems like Charlottesville is just a little sleepy town in Virginia, Central Virginia. But a lot of the things that we're seeing that are going on throughout the country, I mean, it seems like Charlottesville was used as a testing ground for, and there's a lot of like big political politicians and influencers that went to UVA. If you ever go into the Washington, D.C. area, you see those UVA logos with the V and the sabers everywhere. You have people like Larry Sabato running that political school there, and many people come out of that school in his way of thinking. So the tactics that they used as far as harassing people started and then moved on from there. You had a lot of plots, I would say, were hatched in Charlottesville, as far as like going back to the 2016 election. You had this guy Khizr Khan, the Muslim father of the Gold Star Army captain who died. You had the Rolling Stone rape hoax was there at UVA. And what happened with the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally was a start of a model that they could use, which really was the shock and awe campaign, to label anybody who's a political dissident engaging in, you know, free speech in the public square and turning them into some kind of terrorist or whatever. And the media is brought down as just such a powerful psychological weapon. There's no way that you could withstand that. The kinds of things that they've honed to use against President Trump, they can use against just average citizens. And these are tactics that they probably would have used in a foreign theater against dictators in the Middle East or something.
Yeah, I'm currently watching a kind of a documentary on Waco, and it's the same kind of thing. The tactics they used against people that they just decided were, cult members or bad people. David Koresh was, they said he was a pedophile. It's just whatever they say. And the tactics they use, the sounds of the rabbits being, slaughtered and, playing like Nancy Sinatra songs over and over and over. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's literally torturous. So, the diversity of tactics they have, the media, the Antifa, who the foot soldiers or whatever, the government. I mean, what was your shock and awe? Give us a glimpse into what life was like then, right after the rally, and kind of how it's been progressing. I mean, like, for example, have you ever wanted to like flee the United States? And are you able to?
Well, I guess that I'd had thoughts about it, but it was against my better judgment. There were all kinds of things going on with legal issues, lawsuits, and so forth. So I didn't think I would be able to leave for that reason. I've never actually tried to leave the country. I haven't gotten on a flight since Unite the Right. So I'm really curious to see whether I'm on some kind of a list or something. Mm-hmm. I was reading about the DC event and how the feds supposedly have this list that's more broad than just the no-fly list, but it's people who they say are connected to terrorism or whatever, and God knows how they define that. And they were saying that there were dozens of people at the January 6th protest at the Capitol who were on that list. So I don't know what would happen there. I would have loved to have taken a vacation this year, but this COVID stuff has prevented it from happening.
Yeah.
But as far as what I experienced in the aftermath of the Unite the Right, I mean, that rally just it went so differently than I was expecting. I was expecting to have a good optics rally. I was telling people to stay clean, to only be pro-white, to be pro-American history. And yet, whatever trolls that were there that strayed off the reservation and were saying things that were more controversial, those were the people who had cameras in their faces, and it all became about that. And the violence, which was a result of the police stand down, I mean, there's no way. I mean, the media just bashes you over the head with that violent stuff, whether or not you were actually to blame for it. People who I knew, who I was friendly with from college or whatever, would suddenly start writing long Facebook posts denouncing me and remembering things from our relationship in the past in a negative light. It's weird. It's kind of like the propaganda that you see from Soviet Russia, where they're disappearing the guy next to Stalin. So that's one thing that can happen, but also they can completely change who you are. People, the second you become a political enemy, a real political dissident attacked by the media, you're not who you are anymore. You're a villainous caricature. People would give out my phone number, and so I'd just be bombarded with like threatening and lewd text messages and calls constantly. I had to move out of the apartment I was staying at the time because folks were coming by in vehicles, slow rolling, leering at me. Journalists were trying to break into my apartment when they didn't know I was there. They'd come up and jiggle the handles and try and get in. Angry people would come, looking for fights outside my apartment. So it was a huge mess, and just the stress of waking up every day and not knowing what's going to happen from a legal situation, getting fake, phony criminal charges that I beat all of them coming at me one after another, lawsuits coming one after another, and just being lied about. I couldn't. The thing that still hurts me the most to this day is what I get from the conservatives or the right wing, who I mostly agree with on most issues, but they spread all these conspiracy theories about me, you know, saying that I was a Hillary voter, that I worked for Obama, that I was paid by Soros, that I'm an Occupy Wall Street activist, that we set it up to make Trump look bad, that, you know, the Antifa and the alt-right were getting off the same bus. And a lot of this is coming from like very prominent people like Alex Jones, and there's just no way to fight that. And suddenly you are defined in the public consciousness by conspiracy theories, which are like extremely hurtful, and you get your identity stolen from you essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we expect this kind of stuff from the social justice crazies and the, you know, Antifa BLM people, but you know, friends, family, coworkers, um, you know, this is something I think that will happen first to people. You know, they're not going to get canceled by PayPal or Visa first. They're going to get canceled by their neighbors. They're going to get canceled by their fellow congregants at their church. This is what concerns me. You know, my whole thing since I've been doing my Dissident Mama thing is to build bridges, you know, non-leftism, you know, that's kind of my thing. You know, I have my own ideas about that. You know, I definitely have my very passionate beliefs, but, you know, I will ally with somebody, you know, if they're wanting to push away cultural Marxism or big tech tyranny or whatever. So that's what I'm trying to wake people up to, you know, and the fact is you brought up pro-white, and I want you to define that for people, because that probably blew people's minds when you said that, but that there's nothing white people can do to not be white. And that's really what a lot of this is about. So can you define what pro-white means? And then just give us kind of your elevator pitch. I'm sure you're pretty good at it by now, but what you wanted to accomplish with Unite the Right, like what your goals were, you know, before it all panned out the way it did.
Well, I guess pro-white can mean different things to different people, but I tend to use the term because I think that it's the one that's most likely to be used in the context of a white civil rights approach, which is what I support. I don't support any kind of like National Socialism or any kind of Nazi stuff like that. I just simply feel like people should be treated fairly and people should be treated equally, and white people are not being treated fairly or equally. It seems like there's a lot of, to use a leftist term, systemic injustice where, you know, I mean, right now, for instance, just to give one example, the Biden administration is putting the head of the Civil Rights Division in the DOJ, a literal black supremacist who is saying that black people have magic powers and white people are inferior. So that's the person who's going to be deciding civil rights and who is prosecuted and who isn't. The situation in Charlottesville with the black mayor who was calling white women the devil and you know, saying his favorite thing about being down south is looking down on little white men, saying that he hates seeing white people around town, et cetera, et cetera. And then he's still able to keep his job, and not a single person on the council denounces him. And yet, if it was a white man saying, you know, black women are the devil, he would be gone so quick, he wouldn't be able to work again, really. And that would just be if he's lucky. If he's unlucky, you know, he might get some kind of like criminal investigation against him, have his bank accounts closed or something. So I think that the civil rights approach is right. And I think that if we live in a society where all these different identity groups are able to advocate for themselves, then we have to find a healthy way for white people to be able to advocate for themselves. Otherwise, you're not talking about white supremacy. You're talking about supremacy of other groups to just dominate white people so that they don't have a voice in the conversation. The Unite the Right rally for me was supposed to be an event to help address some of those issues. You know, it was supposed to be a pro-white civil rights event that incorporated different elements of the right, as I saw it right after the Trump election. You know, so it was supposed to have MAGA people, alt-light people, and alt-right people. And the reason that I wanted to include all of those groups is because I think that they all saw a changing America, the fact that our history was being attacked. At that time in Charlottesville, it was the Confederate statues like Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee, but also we were clearly anticipating that that was going to happen to other European American figures like the founding fathers. So I saw a lot of promise in MAGA to be able to address these issues, but they still weren't comfortable saying white, you know, even though Trump would come out and say, well, the lowest black unemployment, and we have so many Hispanic supporters, but he wouldn't say white. And I thought that that was really holding us bad and really something that we needed to evolve our mindset on. So the alt-right were comfortable with that. That's why I invited him. It was supposed to be about saving American history. You know, on August 11th, we marched to a statue of Thomas Jefferson. And on August 12th, we held our rally, or we were planning to hold it, at a statue of Robert E. Lee.
Yes, to advocate for just not destroying Southern history, for people who built the United States, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. To advocate for our history, American history, but also our European American history, and for the ability of white people to define themselves and advocate for themselves. And my vision of it was to have it not be about hating any other group of people, but purely to be standing up for ourselves. Now, I think that, you know, obviously the way that the rally is portrayed is like totally different from that. And some of that is the problems with some of the people who attended, but it's also that there's no way that you could ever hold an event like what I'm describing, where the media is going to say, oh, well, these are supporters of American history, or these are white civil rights people. They're never going to say that. They're always going to call you a white nationalist, a neo-Nazi, a neo-Confederate, whatever label it is that they're trying to use to demonize you.
So one of the things I kind of write about, a theme of mine, is I call it the archetype, that the archetype is the Southern white Christian man. Okay, so you've got Southern people who have historically resisted the Leviathan, you know, stood up to centralization. Then you've got, you know, very traditional Christians who happen to be mostly in the South. We know that's kind of fleeting at the moment, but it's still per capita the place where most of these people live. So to me, I do see it as something that is in opposition to whiteness, because they may not really hate white people, but they just see white people as standing in their way because they happen to be against centralization, you know, more conservative and more Christian, which are the things that are completely, you know, in defiance of globalization or the empire or whatever. Would you think that's a fair characterization? I mean, that, you know, I don't know if you're a Christian or not, but that there's this, it's so easy to make the stereotype, which you could be, you look like that, whether or not you know, you're a Christian, or you were even born in the South, but they paint you as this archetype just because they can launch, you're the springboard to do whatever the next thing is. I mean, do you think that's a fair characterization, or do you see it as something different?
Yeah, well, so I am a Christian. I'm not like extremely religious person, but I am a Christian. I pray and all that. I think that, you know, if you were talking about real white supremacy, as the media calls it, you would be talking about dominating other groups of people. I don't think that there's necessarily anything better about white people than any other group of people, but we have a right to defend ourselves, and we have a right not to be attacked and to be treated with dignity. And I don't see why they would have a problem with that. Yeah, the Christianity is definitely something that's been under attack for a long time, and you see that the country is becoming much more secular, much more atheistic, and a big problem with that is that the politics is becoming new religion, the socialism, the social justice, the race war stuff, but race war against white people. They see undoing the legacy of the Confederacy and traditional America as their religious cause. I mean, literally, that's what they were doing in Charlottesville, and you see that if you go anywhere where there's a lot of leftist activists, is there's these Christian churches that have Black Lives Matter signs and gay rainbows and all kinds of transgender stuff, and that's their new morality. It doesn't have anything to do with what's in the Bible, and all they talk about is activism and white supremacy all day.
Yeah, as a Christian, I used to be a Protestant, and now I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I'm constantly beating my head against the wall with people who, think that, going to, a Black Lives Matter rally is like a really nice thing to do. And, I'm trying to explain to them that, you're undercutting the very thing you want to do, because they really don't care about Black lives and all those things. And they're using these foundational principles, Christian morality, altruism, which, for the love of Pete, it's going to be our downfall. I mean, sometimes I just think people need to stop being so nice. The innovations of, white Western man from the Magna Carta going forward, using all these things against us, but none of it's for us. So I call it like an existential war, because I have 3 sons and they're white. And so to me, I'm like, I'll call it pro-white all day long, because they're my responsibility, and I love them, and I do not see a fair world. Like you said, it's not fair, and it's very discriminatory toward them. So yeah, the whole the leftist Christian thing is crazy, and that's very big in Charlottesville, isn't it? I mean, these were the people like yelling crazy things at the people that attended the rally, from what I have seen.
Yeah, I mean, the religious organizations, the Christian churches in Charlottesville, were essentially helping to organize some of the most violent Antifa. The communist militia Redneck Revolt was doing security for them on August 11th. They have repeatedly credited the Antifa for doing the violence that shut down the rally. The Antifa were using the parking lots of these churches as staging grounds. So I have pictures of these so-called clergy in their robes and stuff talking to certain members of Antifa. And then I have the pictures later of them beating somebody on the ground who was holding an American flag. It's really some pretty sick stuff. And I've never heard any of these so-called religious people in Charlottesville talk about Jesus, other than to use some really dumb and insulting talking point about, oh, Jesus was a socialist and he was a brown Middle Easterner, and that doesn't have anything to do with what's in the Bible. The Bible really doesn't have very much in the way of identity politics. Now, it's about certain principles and morality that can be applicable to anybody, and anybody who is willing to accept Jesus. But what they are talking about is all liberal politics, and they come out with glazed hair, pink hair, piercings, tattoos, and like they think that they're going to make the church cool for basically dirty hipsters.
Or they're just subversives, which is the way I see it, and I think they work their way in and worm their way in. And because, Christians, we shouldn't judge each other and all these kinds of things. And then all of a sudden it's craziness. So like when I got doxxed, one of the dudes who shared my name and all this stuff all over Twitter was some clergy person from Charlottesville. I don't even remember his name, because that's how insignificant he is to me. But that's scary stuff. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is to wake up non-leftists and Christians to the fact that you're not safe. They're coming after you. And so let's learn more from you then. What happened with your nonprofit, Unity and Security for America? This was supposed to be kind of like an America First thing, kind of, I guess, before like Nick Fuentes stole the logo. I guess he didn't really steal it, but you know what I mean? He started doing that. What happened? You know, you just wanted to kind of bring people together and you were canceled. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, I had a nonprofit, 501c4 called Unity and Security for America. And it was just sort of a name that some Republican strategists had given to me that sounded like something that was a conservative think tank or whatever. And we just hold meetings within the local community, and the plan was to do fundraising and YouTube videos about, things that were kind of similar to what was part of the Trump agenda in 2016, mostly based around the immigration issues.
Okay. And what happened to it?
Well, I sort of abandoned it after Unite the Right. Just there was too much. There was too many other things going on, so I had to let some of my side projects go. And then as far as, raising money, almost all of the money that I raised, such as it was, had to go towards the legal expenses.
Okay, because I read an article that PayPal had said, no moss to Jason Kessler. That didn't happen?
No, that did happen. I
Okay.
don't know if we were using PayPal for that nonprofit.
Okay. Well, good for you.
Yeah, thank God I removed my money from PayPal because I was anticipating something like that happening.
Okay. So this was like all right at the end of the rally. You're just figuring it's coming?
Yeah, in the aftermath of the rally, a few days after, I was trying to move away from some of the social media companies because they were deplatforming me all over the place. I got banned from Coinbase, the Bitcoin exchange. I got banned from PayPal. My website was taken down. At the time I was using a company called Weebly, and I was really sort of naive about this stuff. So anybody who is trying to build a platform for themselves should really try to build it on a solid foundation and not build it on some of these tech platforms that are not going to have your back. The Weebly, I didn't even know until they'd taken down my website, was a San Francisco-based company. So, of course, they're not going to share anywhere near my politics or a commitment to free speech. And I lost everything. I didn't have any way to download a data file and create it in a new website. It was really a shame, some articles like the Wes Bellamy article that I was talking about that really went viral and got him removed from the Virginia Board of Education, was written about by the Washington Post and other news outlets. That was just gone forever. I have an archived version of it, but it'll never be in the same format as it was before. And I started the SEO all over again from scratch. Of course, I've been banned from many, many other places since then, and a lot of them happened around the time of the second rally, basically from organizations and enemies who've built up their entire profile and just attacking my social media presence and the social media presence of other people, saying that it supports violence or terrorism or whatever, even though, like, in the aftermath of UTR, I was horrified by the amount of violence that had taken place when the police stood down and people clashed. So I spent like all of my time on YouTube denouncing violence, and yet they still deplatform me.
Mm-hmm. And what is the second rally? Is that the one you did for the year anniversary? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I did a second rally in Washington, D.C. next year.
Yeah, it's really crazy. As a person who was going to go and did not, because I thought at the time, monuments are really important to me. And I thought, I probably need to be armed and go. But then even pre-Charlottesville, as we say now, what if I use my gun in self-defense? As naive as I was back then, I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't go, because if I have to use my gun, I'm using it. It's actually amazing. I think that there wasn't more violence. So sometimes I try to turn the tables on people and say, wow, I think the Unite the Right rally people deserve medals because it could have gone so much crazier. I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't live through what you went through. And I know people were getting like tampons thrown at them and cement and all this kind of stuff. It's crazy, but really the fact that it wasn't a shootout, I think is amazing. It's almost a testament to how self-controlled the Unite the Right people were, in my opinion.
Definitely. I mean, in addition to the alt-right groups, you had a number of militias, and the mainstream media constantly uses the image of the people with the AR-15s to attack the rally and say, look how prepared for violence they were or something. But those militia people, you know, they had enormous restraint, and they didn't have a particular affinity for the actual protesters. I think that they actually may have provided medical assistance and to more of the counter protesters than the actual protesters. But I mean, these people were being attacked. Cars were being attacked. People were mobs of people were attacking cars of people who were trying to leave, and still not a single. Well, I'd say one bullet was fired, and there was the guy who was firing a warning shot to stop the individual who was shooting an improvised flamethrower at people who were being pushed out of the park. And of course, they prosecuted that guy to the hilt. I mean, it's unreal. I mean, technically, firing a warning shot is not legal in Virginia, but I mean, within the context of, you know, this individual was shooting a flamethrower at people, you'd think that they'd cut him a little bit of slack.
Yeah. And we'll get into kind of how the DC thing, you know, the little granny coming in with her knitting needles. I mean, I know there was violence there from what we think we can know. You know, we're depending on the media and people's videos and stuff from this, but, you know, if it was going to be a coup, you know, people didn't plan very well for that. So, well, let's talk about parallel institutions for a second. You know, you were talking about how you've gotten, you know, kicked off of these platforms, you know, and everybody's always talking about parallel institutions. You know, we need to do things like under the grid. Do you think that's even possible with big tech? I mean, I honestly don't know. We don't own the internet. Like, how are non-leftists supposed to handle this? Are we supposed to go back to like writing on, you know, stones and doing smoke signals? What are we supposed to be doing?
I don't know, because, you know, the whole concept of free market capitalism and the architecture of the open internet is being subverted by the current people who control it. Folks are not interested in taking the money of people that they disagree with on the right, you know, so there's almost no one who can build the whole chain that you need to stay online as a professional social media company, let's say. I think Gab is doing it right now. They've had to struggle through enormous adversity, and thankfully they have the web host, Rob Monster, and his company Epic. And I think that they're going to step in and help Parler after they were deplatformed. But it's really few and far between the ones who are willing to stand strong, and that's doubly so when it comes to the payment processors. And so even if a website is committed to free speech, if their payment processor tells them that they need to boot somebody off or they're done, then what are they going to do? They're going to go down with the ship and lose their livelihood and not be able to support their families, or are they going to stick by their principles? It's a incredibly difficult choice.
And that, talking about Gab, makes me think of their president or CEO or whatever he is, Andrew Torba, and how he can't use Visa anymore. You know, I mean, he's like a dad to small children, has a family. Has anything like that happened to you? I mean, can you still, you know, use your MasterCard, your Discover card, or, I mean, were you pushed out of those realms too?
Well, I was a Wells Fargo customer for many, many years, for over 10 years. And they just closed my account without any warning right in the middle of this COVID thing, when there were loans and grants and things being handed out. And because they did that, and you needed to have an account with some age on it to get like the PPP loans, for instance,
Mhm.
I lost out on thousands of dollars. I mean, they just screwed me over completely. And
Wait,
I'm
now
pretty
what was this because of COVID or because you're Jason Kessler? Like what's the deal?
No, they closed down my account, and it didn't have anything to do with COVID. I'm just saying that they closed down my account right during COVID when I
Got it.
needed that account to be able to get PPP loans and things of that
I
nature.
see. I can.
So yeah, they closed it down because they said that their risk management department concluded that I was too big of a risk. But yet, you know, I mean, I had money in the account. I had not overdrawn in a long time. I didn't owe any money to them. There was no other reason other than my political activity for them to do that.
So they took your money?
No, they didn't take my money. They
Okay.
gave me a certain amount of time and said, clear out
Okay.
all your money by this point or it might be seized.
Still a hassle, but thank goodness they didn't take your money. That's crazy. That's craziness. So how do you pay for all your legal battles, past and present and future? Is it through donations?
Not really. Donations helped me when I was first starting out. I was in a totally different situation, and I wasn't really able to work for most of 2018 in the fallout of the rally. There's no way I could work around Charlottesville. You know, there were times where I'd get some little handyman gigs and around Charlottesville, and I wasn't able to do those anymore. You know, too much fear of being recognized. And eventually I was able to move out of Charlottesville and start working again. And that's how I pay for my legal bills now is, you know, the money has always been really, really hard to come by. From time to time, people would donate an amount which would be useful, which is like the really useful donations, the ones in thousands of dollars, because that's how much these legal fees cost. But I don't really take in too many donations these days. If people want to donate to the legal stuff, my Bitcoin address is in my Twitter profile, but I pay almost exclusively all my legal bills just from working.
And that makes me assume that you have a good lawyer. I mean, you were able to find good representation.
Yeah, I think so. And I have a few lawyers now that are working on different cases, but the major Charlottesville cases, I'm represented by Elmer Woodard, who's our local counsel. He doesn't do too much of the actual work on the cases. He's there to basically admit our out-of-state attorney, who's our main attorney, James Kalinich, out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And yeah, he's done a good job because a lot of the folks in these Charlottesville lawsuits have been roughed up really badly by things that no one who hasn't been involved in a major legal battle would know about. Like, you think in terms of like the case that you just gather the evidence and then you present it in court, but when you're dealing with something of this nature, especially in the internet age, when so many of us have so many accounts and we're sending text messages and all these other things, like, if they want to be dicks about it, and they do want to be dicks about it in this case, they'll make you turn over every single thing. And you have to think of every single account you've had where you ever mentioned the damn rally. And the rally, it was such a big deal to someone like me, for instance. You know, of course, I've said so many things in so many places. And so you got to come up with all of that in discovery. And if you can't do that, then you lose before the thing even begins, because they'll say, like they're doing to some people who've refused to comply with the discovery, oh, well, they didn't meet their obligations, so we should be able to infer that the stuff that they would have handed over would have shown that they were guilty. And then there's all kinds of questions and depositions, which is testimony under oath and blah, blah, blah. And so the attorney is really helpful to protecting you during all of those pre-trial issues that you have in particular. And I think he's done well by us. Our attorneys represent me, Nathan D'Amigo, Identity Europa, TWP, Matt Parrott. And they used to represent a whole bunch of other people who, like Chris Cantwell and so forth, who stop paying their legal bills, and so they're no longer clients.
Yeah, I mean, so is it true that you could have gone, not you, because you're not in jail, but did people go to jail for simply attending the rally? Is this a true statement?
I would not say that. It's more complicated than that. It's more like, if you attended the rally, they will prosecute you for things that they normally would not have prosecuted you for.
Okay.
That's the way that it is. And then they will also seek much harsher sentences, and they're more likely to get the harsher sentences.
Okay.
If you are attacked, on the other hand, those people are less likely to be charged with the crime, and they're more likely to be able to get away with the crime. So if you are a dissident and the government decides they really want to go after you, they will find something. Everybody has something, and they'll find that weakness, and then they'll turn it into the biggest thing. You are the most evil person, the most criminal person, whether you are or not.
Okay. Now you've had some court cases that are gone. They've been settled. What is this about the FOIA that has to do with Charlottesville and people trying to get rid of documents? Do you want to go into that, or is that something you can't go into because it's pending?
No, we can go into that, and this doesn't really have anything to do with my conduct, so it's not really as big of an issue for me to talk about. I have been researching the Charlottesville situation for almost 4 years now. I would say I know more about it than anybody else on this planet. And the
Now,
majority
when you say situation, do you mean the rally, or like what Charlottesville was before the rally? Like,
well, the rally in particular.
okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
what went wrong, the aftermath of it. I've analyzed every angle of it, from who the Antifa were, who were involved, what violence they did, finding the pictures, finding the video, finding their names, their criminal records. I've gone into like the government communications, because the government setup of the event was a major component, and that's the subject of one of my lawsuits against the city. And the way that I've gone about that, because it's been one of the greatest avenues of opportunity for research, is Freedom of Information Act requests. Because there was such a great starting point in the Charlottesville Independent Review that was conducted after the rally took place, and that describes a lot of the ways that the police were communicating, a lot of the types of interactions that members of the city council and the mayor and so forth had. And so I would take little details from that review, and then I would request things. And then based on that information, I would request more things. And so after the 3.5 years or so, I finally found an avenue, like an Achilles heel, to attack these people, for what they had done, to get at the truth, because they had been stonewalling me on a lot of issues for a long time. The Charlottesville Independent Review describes how the chief of police, Al Thomas, and members of the Charlottesville police command staff, they destroyed text messages and emails which were relevant to that review. So that is actually a crime. That's a class 1 misdemeanor, and which is the highest grade of misdemeanor. If these people had been convicted of that, they would be barred by Virginia law from ever holding public office again. So it is not some minor thing. It's something that's taken very seriously. It's destruction of public records, and also fraudulently changing public records. It was another thing. The Independent Review said that the police chief was creating new documents to make it seem like he'd done like all these different things to make the rally safe, and then he was having his command staff backdate it to look like it was created before the rally. So that's crime. In March of 2019, I requested those text messages because I figured, well, once they were identified as something which were improperly deleted, they had to have recovered them, right? But they said, we don't have them, so we don't have to turn them over. It's a weird wrinkle in the Freedom of Information Act request realm, is like, yes, you can request almost any public record and they have to turn it over to you, but it has to be records that are in their possession. So what if they're not in their possession because they unlawfully destroyed them to get rid of incriminating behavior? So the law is very weak there, you know, and actually right now their attorneys are arguing, oh yeah, we don't have to turn that over, we destroyed it, you know. So it's really incredible. So the head of the Charlottesville government, who was in the command center when the police chief said let them fight and was supervising that guy, is the city manager, Maurice Jones. It's not the mayor. Everybody always says, oh, the mayor of Charlottesville. The mayor of Charlottesville was not the guy. So the city manager, I requested his text messages and emails because the Haefy report said that he was sending out instructions and communicating by text message. So they did a similar thing and said, we do not have any emails or text messages. So what ended up happening was that mayor, Mike Signer, he wrote a book that he released earlier in, last year, or I think March of 2020, called Cry Havoc. And in that book, he describes with great specificity the date, time, and content of a lot of these text messages and emails. So what I did was I filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, which probably would have cost me like $5,000 if I hired an attorney. And I did this pro se, which means representing yourself. And I included the pages from that book with the text messages content as exhibits. And so what they did was, a week before the trial was going to happen, they sent me a letter saying, here is a link to almost 1,200 pages of emails. Sorry, we didn't see that you were asking for the emails. So whatever, likely excuse. But I got all these emails. And then they said, but we cannot turn over the text messages because the city, as was consistent with city practice at the time, the city manager wiped his phone on his way out the door in 2018. So they basically said there's no way to get these text messages, which were crucial. And the reason the text messages are so crucial is, number one, you already had people destroying them. So that's a huge red flag. Why would they do that in the context of the review that was going on? The chief of police was doing that. But also the few text messages I do have from these individuals, it's not like a lot of emails where people know that they're subject to Freedom of Information Act and they're being very careful, like saying things that, you know, they would only say with a lawyer present or something. These in these text messages that were described by the mayor are like passionate, they're angry, they're blaming and finger pointing, and they're right in the moment. Like, why are you allowing people to be beaten in the streets without doing anything? Let me into the command center. I'm the mayor, damn it. That kind of stuff. And so I wanted more of that. I want to see all that and the stuff that they didn't want to put in there because they were blaming each other in closed door meetings after the fact too. So the fact they destroyed that was very suspect. The Virginia Public Records Act says that the city manager communications are never supposed to be destroyed. They're supposed to be kept permanently in agency. And then regardless of what the retention laws are, the law in Virginia says you can not destroy public records when they're subject to litigation. There are so many people, like the Charlottesville government has screwed people over and taken their civil rights from them so many times, so egregiously. When you think about what they did at the rally, just standing down and allowing Antifa to beat the crap out of people, then charging and prosecuting the hell out of people who defended themselves. Then when someone like me goes in and tries to look for the records to see what really happened about us being set up, they destroyed the records, and no one in the media is holding them accountable. And everybody, even a lot of people who went to the rally, are just moving on like this doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. People were set up. How am I supposed to defend myself against these horrible accusations that people who are suing me make? how am I supposed to prosecute the city government for our civil rights violations when the evidence has been destroyed? It's absolutely unacceptable. And so that's why we filed this newest lawsuit, which is dealing with Freedom of Information Act and dealing with the Public Records Act this time. And it's to address that letter where they admitted that they destroyed the evidence. So we're trying to get, like, really set some pretty exciting precedent for open government in Virginia, because it's such a murky area where the precedent hasn't been set. But we're basically trying to get a declaration of law saying that these people broke the law by destroying evidence for Unite the Right. And that will have ramifications for everybody involved in a court case with Unite the Right, everybody. Because how can we properly defend ourselves? How can we properly prosecute our rights without the full and complete evidence? But also, we want an injunction to keep them from ever destroying any more evidence like this again. And we want them to recognize that these text messages are public documents and they need to change their practices forever because of this situation. And then finally, probably the most interesting aspect is that we're going to try and deal with this loophole in the Virginia FOIA where you don't have to turn over records if you put them into a paper shredder or delete them off your hard drive. That's crap. So we're asking for the judge to order them to hire an electronic forensics and e-discovery firm to basically go over their hard drives, their phones with a fine-tooth comb and reconstitute these destroyed messages so we can find out what the hell it is that they were saying in the first place that they so badly didn't want anybody to see.
I mean, that's fascinating to me. And on one hand, my first question is going to be, how are you still such a fighter after having gone through what you've been through? But my second would be, what do you think about people who don't understand, the people who you were talking about who are moving on? I mean, to me, a person who didn't even go to Charlottesville, but, you know, I followed it closely, was thinking about going. It happened in my home state where I was, you know, born and raised. Such a watershed moment that everything is built upon. And this DC thing, you know, they're calling it like it's the Tiananmen Square of the U.S. I mean, to me, that was the Unite the Right rally. That was the Tiananmen Square. It all is built on that. So first, I mean, why are you still fighting? Is it just because you're so passionate about civil rights and free speech and due process? And then second of all, what would you say to the people who do want to move on? Because, you know, I think it's going to become apparently clear very much this year that nobody can move on because we're all going to get Charlottesville, right?
Well, I'm motivated by injustice, and I always have been. I was motivated to do the Unite the Right rally because of the double standards with the treatment of racism towards white people versus racism towards other people. And I mean,
can I ask you a question? Is that just because of how you were raised, or just because you got, you know, involved in politics? I mean, you were like a psychology major. How did this thing happen? Just because you started paying attention to the world?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've always been working class, you know. I know what it is to be bullied in school. I know what it is to not be the richest person. I know what it is not to be listened to by, you know, the power structure, not to be able to get a good job when I need one, all these things. And so I want to fight back against that. And I hate when the truth doesn't win out, when people suppress the truth and everyone believes in a lie. And that's what happened at Unite the Right is, you know, the truth was lost behind this agenda, and these horrible lies are believed by people. And it's a major historical event that people have no idea what the hell really happened.
Yeah.
And that drives me crazy. And there's a personal involvement to that with me because so many people believe that I'm like some neo-Nazi or something, and I'm not, and I hate that, and I want to fight back against that. But I think even more broadly, it's the fact that, you know, I can't believe what they did to free speech in this country. You know, when I was more on the left than I am now, you know, I wasn't really that different than I am today. I believed in free speech, and
Yep.
I hated the people who were trying to suppress it, even when I didn't agree with the speech all the time. And I always saw the people who were defending controversial speech as the heroes. And I don't know how it changed so quickly that people need to be destroyed over the words that they say. And people, regardless of whether they said something that was offensive or politically incorrect at the Unite the Right rally, they had a right to peaceably assemble. They had a right for the government to protect them from harm from basically armed paramilitary gangs who wanted to shut them up. And not only were they not allowed that, but they were turned into like history's biggest scapegoats. And it's totally unacceptable to me. And it's totally unacceptable that the government clearly set this thing up and they're not being held accountable. So I want that to be dealt with, and the ramifications, I see it on and on and on. And it frustrates me because even I don't see like Richard Spencer or a lot of these other people who attended the event, even as top billed speakers, ever think deeply about the ramifications of what's happening and how Charlottesville relates, because I see it. Like, for instance, the some of the lawyers who have these conspiracy theories against us, saying that it wasn't a rally, it was actually planned violence. You know, they manipulate our language and they lie about the things that we're saying, like omitting things that have to do with the self-defense aspect of what happened. And then they go to Uber and they go to PayPal and they go to all these different companies in Silicon Valley, and they're giving lectures as if they're authorities, as if their case has been proven, you know, and they're doing a one-sided prosecution with these tech companies. And that's part of why people are being deplatformed. They don't realize that a cottage industry has sprung up around the aftermath of the Unite the Right rally. And that cottage industry has sown the seeds of what people are seeing in January 6th, because all of it works together. You know, there's just so much hatred around right-wing political dissidents right now. And part of it is these people sowing the seed, saying these are all terrorists, blah, blah, blah. Then the second that something goes even slightly wrong, like with the December 6th thing, you have the media saying, these are terrorists. Didn't you heed the warning, blah, blah, blah. And the tech companies who have been like mildly, tepidly defending the free speech of dissidents will say, holy shit, we don't want to be involved in terrorism. And so then they kick everybody off the platform. And that's growing larger and larger and larger, the number of people that are the political dissidents capable of being silenced. So now it's all the way up to the president of the United States.
Yeah, and what was January 6th? What, a week and a half ago? So it started with storming the Capitol, and then it went to the deadly Capitol siege, you know, forgetting that Ashley Babbitt was one of the two dead people, and, you know, nobody's going to be saying, say her name. And then now it's like a white supremacist coup. And what was the last thing I read? Oh, a white nationalist insurrection. Like,
yeah,
we've heard this before, haven't we, people?
Yeah, I was watching a propaganda video at dinner earlier this evening, and basically it was showing images of like the Civil War and saying, even during the height of the American Civil War, you never had Confederates invading the United States Capitol, or neo-Nazis occupying the United States Capitol, blah, blah, blah. And so they show the guy with the Confederate flag in there who is like doing nothing but maybe a minor trespass at worst. He's just standing there, which is definitely within keeping of civil disobedience as it's understood by the American left.
Yeah. Yeah. And my thing would be, after First Manassas, they should have gone into Washington and taken over, and then we wouldn't be where we are now. But that's a whole different podcast. Okay. So, so what, you know, obviously you're seeing, you know, correlation between Charlottesville and the DC stuff. I mean, do you think it was a honeypot, DC? And do you think finally the lady with the knitting needles, who's now on the no-fly list, like she's going to wake up? Like, what's going to happen? Or is everybody just going to crawl into a hole because they're scared to death? But my point is, if you take everything away from people, all the things that distract them from how unfree they are, I mean, eventually maybe something really, really wild is going to happen. I mean, what are your predictions? What do you think? I mean, oh, and then my second part of that would be the Richmond rally, which took place a year ago, the whole gun thing that was, you know, a state thing, but it became this big national news. You know, like my husband went to that, my sister went to that. Why did nothing happen there? If you have any thoughts on that too. So tell me your thoughts about what's going to happen, the ramifications of DC and a Biden administration, and why was Richmond so peaceful?
So I think from a certain perspective, everything is a honeypot. Everything is a psyop when it comes to right-wing activism. And that's, if you're in a social media group, there are people who are watching you. You know, the Antifa are the KGB tattletales who are sending information to the feds, and they work hand in hand with one another. And not just where we're talking about illegal activity, which is a different thing. We're talking about disrupting political organizing, which is protected by the First Amendment. And and every event that you could possibly go to, if the left decides that they want to turn it into an op, if they want their media people to like come in and really destroy the people involved with it, they're going to do that. And they can take any set of facts to bolster that narrative. I mean, it could have just been like somebody getting shoved or something, and they could have turned it into domestic terrorism. There could have been no fatalities, and they could have called it domestic terrorism on January 6th. So, I mean, personally, I think people should still do activism for the things that they believe in, but that should always be part of the calculus when you're deciding your event, is that this is going to be set up by the media, and there's nothing you can do about that. And a big problem with the American right is that they're terrible at dealing with that. What they do is they point fingers at each other. You're a Fed. No, you're a Fed. This is a honeypot. That's a honeypot. You know, they're terrible at supporting one another. And they don't understand that the people that they're pointing their fingers at are, you know, they're going to be just like them under certain circumstances. And that's one of the things that I saw with regards to a lot of the people who were in the January 6th thing, like Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones, were scapegoating me over Charlottesville and saying all kinds of horrible things about me. Why would you do these rallies? People are being hurt, blah, blah, blah. When you're a dissident, that's sort of what happens. You know, they're going to try to hurt you no matter what. So now they are in the same boat because they thought that they were different. They thought they were smarter, they were better optics or something like that, and they were wrong. They were very wrong about that. So in terms of the Richmond thing, you know, you never know exactly. I think one of the common threads between Charlottesville and the DC thing was like the big names associated with it. I think that really sweetens the pot for the left to want to really turn it radioactive and go nuclear on it. Is at the Charlottesville event, you had a lot of big names within the growing alt-right that they hated, and they, in retrospect, you know, bringing all those people together like that was a perfect opportunity for them to just try and wreck the whole thing at once. And then they made a similar mistake on January 6th, where they made it to a whole other level because they brought the president and roped him into it. And then they had congressmen, Paul Gosar and others, who were working with this guy Ali from Stop the Steal. And then you had other big personalities like Fuentes and Alex Jones, who they would love to be able to associate with violence, because once you associate even with the hint of violence whether you're actually the violent person or not, you're just in the proximity at a violent event, then they can say, well, we're not just taking them down for their speech, we're taking them down to prevent future violence.
Right.
I mean,
Public
that's
safety and all that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they don't hold BLM to that, you know, but of course you wouldn't expect them to.
Yeah. So let's wrap up with this. You know, divine intervention. That's one thing that you had said in that interview I watched of you recently, where you said it's going to take divine intervention to unite the right. And because of so many of the things that you've said. So like my recent piece on the DC protest was, I don't care if it was a honeypot. I don't care if it was a psyop. We should embrace it. You know, we should say that damn straight we went to the Capitol. We're going tomorrow. We're going the next day, and you're not going to stop us. So instead of everybody freaking out and making it allowable that people have put on no-fly lists and lose their jobs and stuff, you know, we stop playing along with the stupid narrative that only ever hurts us. So you had said that it's going to take divine intervention to unite the right. In my opinion, it is going to be what it's going to take, because I think so many on the right, which that's why I call it non-leftism, because, you know, we don't share so many of these things. Again, the lady with her knitting needles, she probably loves Abraham Lincoln. I see him as the source of the problem that we're living with today. You know, the egalitarian gobbledygook and, you know, quoting, you know, Jefferson, you know, all men are created equal. I mean, and they want like equal suffering for all me and my sons and you, but not for them, you know, so just the establishment and, you know, oligarchs and all this kind of stuff. So having said all that, I think the right is too godless, honestly, whatever that is. Non-leftism, you know, you got these paganist streams and these people who just, you know, think that Christianity was, you know, a plot of Jewish conspirators and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, how are we supposed to ally together when we can't even agree that we're all children of God? So that would be my last thing to you. Do you really think it's going to take divine intervention, or do you think it's going to get so bad that we're just going to have to ally with people we don't agree with?
Yeah, I mean, it really is going to take divine intervention or deus ex machina, you know, like to deal with this situation, because it's really bad. Like the situation on the right is not like it is on the left. There's infighting on the left, but they sort of rally around one another. They do fundraisers for one another and support each other when they're cracked down on. On the right, people just turn on each other. It's sort of like the John Carpenter movie, The Thing, you know, where one person is an alien, let's say, and everybody else is trying to figure out who it is. This person's a Fed, or the way that the far right will say this is a Jew or whatever, just like accusing one another of these things, like this person is an outsider and trying to blame them. I think it's really counterproductive, and you have to let go of that stuff. I think that the key is to be totally lawful, to embrace nonviolence, and also to love one another. I think that might be where the Christian, the religious aspect comes into it, because I think having some kind of godly principle is going to make it easier to love your brothers and sisters. I think that's really what's missing. There's so much like Machiavellianism on the right, and like everybody wants to cut each other's throats and stab each other's back. And part of it is like the whole internet culture and people trying to get clout for one another and to be on the top and the most popular. I mean, it's just a really sick, and you could call it materialistic or like spiritually corrupt sort of culture. So yeah, we've got to have forgiveness for one another. We've got to love one another, and a religious basis would certainly help with that.
Well, Jason, I think you're a great guy, and I will consider you a compatriot. I hope you will consider me one. And I just think you're very brave, and a lot of people would not even have made it out of the city of Charlottesville after they had gone through what you've been through. And I'll be praying for you, brother. And I thank you so much for coming on my show to tell your story to my 500 listeners. Yeah, I'm the big time man. And I just appreciate it because I think that truth is the most important thing. And I'm glad you're fighting for it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
All right. Bye-bye.